Describing Richard Bandler is like describing Escher's relativity. Your eye focuses on the reality you want to see. To some, he is a genius.
As you take a deep breath...
To others, he is a carnival hypnotist. He is a grandfather, father, husband, educator, musician, artist, and the prior defendant in a murder case. He's sincere. He's flippant. He's quiet. He's bombastic.
When somebody speaks...
One moment he is using the English language in a manner few can master.
Your purpose.
Then, in a flash, speaks like a hardened, angry sailor.
What the fuck? And you're just gonna laugh and go for it.
Richard can make someone feel at ease and uncomfortable all at the same moment. But what everyone agrees upon is that he's changed the way humans communicate to one another, and more importantly, to themselves.
Bigger than that.
Richard is the sanest madman I've ever met. He just explodes, you know, with energy and enthusiasm and brilliance and nonlinearity in ways that are sometimes so shocking and surprising that it produces the very best learning.
Did you think you would be doing that this morning?
It's quite scary, actually. He's very forthright, very sure of himself, comes across as very, very confident. And why not? And he's just amazing. He's got the business side of it, he's got the scientific side. He's in it to help people, he's in it to help humanity and change people's lives for the better.
I remember when I first met him, I was 9, and my mom was dating this new guy, and he came over to make us breakfast, and I don't know why, but I kept spilling orange juice. Like, I don't know why I was doing it, but I was 9 and I was testing this new person in our household. And he made breakfast, he poured me orange juice and I knocked it over. And I just waited for a reaction, and then he poured me another glass and I knocked it over. And then he poured a third glass and he knocked it over. And that was like my first memory.
He's funny. I mean, he's just funny as hell, right? And that's part of his magic.
Richard was a very controversial figure, particularly in Santa Cruz. There were people who thought that he walked on water, and there were people who thought he was the devil incarnate.
I've heard all sorts of different stories, and before I'd even met Richard, I'd heard stories that he was a murderer, that he was a drug addict, terrible stuff. And also, you know, that he was bad-tempered.
He has a temper. You know, he could blow up and yell at you.
He's a bit of a mad scientist sometimes. But the thing that people don't understand is that, you know, the press is out there saying he's crazy. But the one thing I do know is that most geniuses are a little crazy.
People will come from so many different angles that you'll see so many different experiences with Richard. I think the only thing that I would say is through time there have been great innovators. If you look at people like Darwin, people like Wilhelm Reich, who were often vilified in their own time. And I think we have an opportunity in this age to recognise Richard Bandler for his contribution to humanity whilst he's still with us.
I had this thing where I got stopped by a cop and he asked me, it was on California Highway Patrolman, and he looked at me and he said, "What do you do for a living?" And it was really hard to explain. It still is to this day. And I had 3 books on the floor. There was a neurology book, and John Grinders had just gotten a copy of his new linguistics book, and a programming manual for PDP 1134A. And I looked down and I went, neuro-linguistic programming.
It's a set of tools and an epistemology for creating models of success and being able to describe those models in such a way that they can be passed on and utilized by others.
I figured out that I only needed 2 classes to graduate as a psych major. So I had transferred to Kresge College And they didn't have Kresge College built yet. So they had it in the student apartments. And that's when I first met John Grinder, because he was my college advisor.
The first thing I remember about John Grinder is he was getting students to lie across Highway 17 in protest of the war, you know, the Vietnam War. And he would invite students to faculty meetings because he thought they should know what's going on. And, you know, he was this, and he thought therapy was bourgeois crap. But Richard was a fairly persuasive guy, and he finally got John to come to see what he was doing. And John was impressed. He thought, well, this is not bourgeois people wallowing in their, you know, their problems.
I was living in the Santa Cruz Mountains in a little tiny place up in SoCal. And the reason I was living there for free is because earlier in junior college, I had met a doctor named Robert Spitzer. And Dr. Robert Spitzer, I gave his son music lessons. And when I said I was transferring to UCSC, you know, they went, and they told me, they said, oh, we have an extra house. I'd never heard that phrase, extra house. I mean, it was, to me, it was so alien. Lived up there rent-free, going to college, which was good for me. He had people coming to that place they had up there all the time, psychiatrists, and I kept meeting these people and listening to them talk. And that's how I met Virginia Satir. He called me up and he said, Virginia was coming and she doesn't know how to light a fire or do those country things that you have to do. I met Virginia and I kept trying to find out what these people did, you know, because see, I've always been one of those people that wants to do things, not talk about them, but actually do them. And I kept asking questions of, you know, these guys that were psychiatrists. I go, so when people come in, how do you make them better? They would go, that's not how it works. And I go, what do you mean that's not how it works? You know, I mean, you go to a doctor, they're supposed to fix you. That was my reference for the world.
For me, to take things that are abstract or that are diffused and make something that can focus them.
And all I did from the beginning of my career was look at an entire field of disorganized information and go, you know what? All of this stuff. So I found first the best therapist, Virginia. I went and saw what she did, till the point where I could predict what she was going to say next. I did the same thing with Fritz Perls. We kept going around. It was very difficult to find people who were any good and got any results.
Bandler and Grinder were one of the first distributors of Apple computers, and they were all interested in programming. That's where the neuro-linguistic programming came in. Programming was a big thing. John was impressed with what Richard was doing, but Richard, of course, had no idea what he was doing. He had absorbed all this stuff, and John made this pact with him, where this was the pact that started NLP. He said, Richard, I think you're doing something really interesting. And he said, if you teach me to do what you're doing, I'll tell you what you're doing. And it wasn't a, you know, it wasn't a tit for tat thing. John was saying, I can tell you what you're doing, but I won't be able to tell you what you're doing until I can do it. That's the notion of modeling. I can't do it by just observing you. Modeling means I've got to take it on. So again, I've got to become the chameleon, because as Grinder would say, you can't make a model of a language you can't speak, right, as a linguist. So I've got to learn that language, then I can actually put it into a structure. And so in the beginning, that's why, you know, Richard was the doer. Richard was the guy that was doing all the magic.
Long run. That really pleases me.
I mean, John couldn't just sit back and watch him. John had to try to do it himself.
When you go and you study something to find out if it's true, it's a lot of work. If you assume it's all true and then just find out what in it works and not worry about whether it's true or false, just take the stuff that works. See, modeling is different than theorizing. Theorizing, you have to justify what makes something happen. You have to look at the universe and go, why is it here? And then somebody goes, well, God made it. And somebody goes, well, you know, it was just a big bang. And then this guy goes, well, who made the big bang? You know, and then this guy goes, well, it just happened. And this one, it's just got. I don't have to do any of that. See, all I have to build is a mathematical representation of what works, so that I can go, if this works, well, what else would work?
I think the accident, in a way, the fact that the first three models happen to be therapeutic models, you know, Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir, Milton Erickson, that it was about creating the model of success, and then it turns out these are human things, that it isn't bound by therapy. It's about modeling success. It definitely has that ability to help people transform, help people have a new now, to get to goals. And at the same time, it just depends on where you put your focus. Are you focusing on where you're going? It's called coaching in NLP. Are you focused on where you've been? It's called counseling in NLP. Are you focused in leadership? Are you trying to create a role? I think all of these are legitimate applications through the modeling process.
So what they would do typically is they would do a Tuesday and Thursday evening group. And on the Tuesday one, Richard was the main leader, and John was kind of the second one. And then they would switch. On Thursday, John would lead it, and Richard would be the second one, until John could do it as well as Richard. And that's how they started formalizing it.
And things like the placebo effect can fix them. The inverse is true, but it's not exploited in this culture in a way
And that's what they did with Erickson.
Originally, the first 4 chapters of The Structure of Magic was my thesis. I did an epistemological study of different kinds of psychotherapies. We looked at them as theories of knowledge instead of psychological treatments. In other words, what are these people teaching you to do?
Gregory Bateson moved in across from us, and he read The Structure of Magic, and he was really, really taken by it. He said it's just exactly what we needed at Stanford Research Institute when we were trying to solve some problems there. If we had had this model, if we had had this pathway, it would have been awesome.
Then Gregory Bateson sent John Grinder and I down to meet Milton Erickson, who was in a league by himself. And we studied his language, read transcripts of everything he did, tape recorded videotape the time we were with him, went over it 1,000 times, got the language patterns, which are the basis of the book Patterns 1, Patterns of the Hypnotic Technique with Milton H. Erickson, and Patterns 2, because we went down the first time for about a week, and that book came out 2 months later.
NLP is grounded in part in hypnosis. The work with Milton Erickson. There was also Virginia Satir and Fritz Perls, but the 3 people that Bandler and Grinder were first looking at. But Erickson is the guy that really stands out.
And when do you think you'll go into a trance for me?
From the way my arm feels, I would imagine I might be in one now.
When they went down to see Erickson, Bateson plugged them in there. And they would go, they would come back and do it to us, what they saw Erickson doing. So it wasn't until they came back and could do all this hypnotic phenomena with us, we used to call it the Academy of Space, because we were space cadets. Now we were out there exploring all these things, and by repeating all of these things with us, that's how they figured out, well, okay, here's what we're doing. Interesting thing is they weren't just going down and observing and taking notes about Dr. Erickson. They were going down, experiencing it, coming back up here, doing the same thing with us, and when they could do it as facilely, as strongly, that's how they would make their patterns.
We had started modeling Milton and added this gigantic set of tools.
All the way. All the way shut now. And take a deep breath and go way deep into a trance. And in any future...
Because altered states, especially hypnotic altered states, meditation and all of these things, when you can induce an altered state rapidly and quickly in people and maintain it, you can do a lot really fast that has a permanent kind of effect.
That's right. There we go. 2. Just relax. 3. There you go. 4. 5. That's right. Just relax. Let your mind go. Let your head go. That's the thought. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to lift up your arm, and I'm going to tell your unconscious, that's right, to let your arm go down and go stiff, but only go down at the rate and speed that it pulls things it knows out of the brain and starts to format them, so that you move all this confusion on purpose into understanding.
And when I started thinking in just quicker terms like that, I started getting faster results.
And you have a great machine that understands. Now it's time to use it. 1, 2, 3, open your eyes. Does that explain?
When we developed the meta model, rather than asking why, that's the causal universe. And, you know, they even had a computer program that was a computerized psychiatrist, and it was a terrible thing. And you'd type in, you know, I'm feeling depressed, and it would go, why are you depressed? And you go, because my mother doesn't love me. You know, why doesn't your mother love you? And, you know, infinite ad regress that way. Whereas the meta model is recursive. You take the form of the sentence and you ask about the structure of the sentence, really. So if people go, I can't be happy, and you go, what stops you from being happy? You're trying to find out what's on this side, or if you go, what would happen if you were happy? You're asking on what's outside of their belief systems.
Can you make a picture of yourself getting up happily? Doesn't have to be a real picture. It just has to be a picture. I want you to make one that you would like. What would you like to look like when you were just jumping out of bed?
One of the things we teach people with the meta model is when they get a sentence like "my father scares me," to ask for a specification of the process that the person is referring to called scare. So how specifically does your father scare you? How specifically do you know you're depressed or guilty or phobic?
See, know is another word like scare. It doesn't specify the process. So if I say to you, well, I think that I have a problem. See, it doesn't tell you anything about the process. So if you say, how do you think it? Initially people will go, what? Somewhat like that. But after they get over the initial shock of being asked such a weird question, they'll begin to demonstrate to you first non-verbally the process. They'll go, well, I just think it. Or they'll go, I don't know, I just, you know, it's just a thought I have.
And of course the combination of the unspecified verbs that the person's using and the quite elegant specification non-verbally by eye movement and body shifts will give you the answer to the question, whether they ever become conscious of it or not.
Human language is imagery, multi-sensory imagery. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that geniuses were imaging. Leonardo da Vinci's notes, image, 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 image.
I was reading neurology journals, and this woman named Dorothy Kimura mentioned that her eyes shake like this all the time, and that's so that the nerve doesn't habituate. So they attached a picture to the eyeball to see what would happen, and of course the picture disappeared, because as it moved back and forth, the picture stayed in the same place, so therefore the nerves habituated, and it just disappeared. And but she said, when I asked people what the picture was, everybody stopped and their eyes shifted up and to the left. And I went, ooh. In order to get information, you have to access it. And this comes from computers. You know, you put in a name and it gives you the address, telephone number, and stuff like that. It shows you a picture on your iPhone. And the brain is no different. You have to stop and think. So when you ask somebody what color are your mother's eyes, typically people stop, their eyes go up and to the left if they're right-handed, and they recall that image. Whereas if you have them construct images, like make a picture of a giraffe with a rhinoceros's head, their eyes go to the opposite direction. So I started testing. I had a class at the university then with lots of people in it, and I went in and I went, do you people know the first 4 notes of Beethoven's symphony? And they all went, They went down and to the left, and I said, what does it feel like to slip into a warm bath? And they all touching themselves at the midline and went down and to the right. And I went, oh man, downright important. So we started literally asking things about, specific things about, feelings, pictures, constructed images. Can you see yourself? Because you don't actually see yourself unless you're watching a videotape. But, can you see yourself doing something you haven't done before? That's a constructed image versus, a remembered image. What color are your mother's eyes? How many chairs are in your living room?
He's made so many observations about human beings. I mean, nobody had spotted eye accessing cues that, when people are looking up, it's pictures. When people are moving their eyes side to side, it's auditory. They're making sounds in their head, or unless they're looking down, they can be internal dialogue or going into feelings. And nobody had ever spotted that before, but he did. And that's now mainstream.
Now, noticing accessing cues, and by the way, my grandson saw the accessing cue chart in my office. There was a little picture of it in the office. And he goes, what's that? We have that in our classroom. And I went, really? And he goes, where did it come from? And I said, I made it up. And he goes, really? He goes, you make up all this stuff, don't you? He goes, you've been around forever, haven't you? And I go, thanks a lot, grandson.
His ability to observe things and then to draw conclusions from that were amazing. When he came up with the concept of submodalities, now modalities, the main modalities being the 5 senses, submodalities are the qualities of each of those senses, you know, so in other words, if someone imagines something or creates an internal image of something, is it in color, is it moving, is there, you know, it's the quality of each of those. And that he actually observed that and tested that and found that those were major influences on how people thought and how patterns could be changed. If you changed the submodality, you changed the pattern. That, to me, was one of the biggest and most, probably in my mind, one of the greatest discoveries of modern psychology.
I was on the radio once in Ireland. When I lived in Ireland, I tried to keep quiet. Somebody once told me, never be a prophet in your own town. But they called me up because somebody heard that I lived there, and this guy calls me from a radio program, and he tells me, he goes, well, we're doing a thing on phobias, and you're an expert on them. And I said, no, I'm an expert on getting rid of them. I said, and I don't really think they are phobias. It's just that people learn to be afraid of something, and sometimes they learn in a heartbeat.
One of the things about people is that they're such exquisite learners. And I'm always amazed at how people can learn things so quickly. A lot of what they learn is not worth having learned. I mean, think about how many futile things you've learned. Mm-hmm. Can you stop now and remember the same pictures that you were remembering last night? Can you get back the feelings of panic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Okay, now, take the picture and literally zoom in closer.
Okay, I'm going to close my eyes to do this.
All right, you can close your
shut out the light.
If you do, and by literally zooming in on that picture, it's like a zoom lens, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
As you zoom in on that picture, you get panic. Go ahead and make the picture bright and focus in on it. Try. Close your eyes again and move right in. And as you approach very closely to it, you begin to feel the panic. Okay, what I want you to do is to see in the small lower left-hand corner a little tiny dark square that has a picture of you the way you would be if you had made this change. And it's real dark in the corner, but suddenly the big picture begins to get darker, and the other one begins to expand and become brighter until it fills the whole screen. But you can do it faster than that. There you go. Hurry up. Until you can see yourself the way you would be. Like that? Mm-hmm. Now, what I want you to do is the exact same thing, and I want you to do it 5 times real fast.
I just make it so it's not a problem anymore.
Well, I can get the panic, but it's not as intense.
Go ahead and try and keep the not as intense panic.
It just isn't working, is it?
Uh-oh. You got tricked. You see, it's not so hard to change, is it?
Not really.
You know, a client could come to me and say, well, I know why I've got the phobia. When I was 4 years old, there was a big spider in my bath and I completely freaked out. So I know I've got it, I know the reason, but I'm still frightened. So knowing the reason doesn't necessarily eradicate it. So with psychotherapy, knowing why, sometimes it's still there. I'm not taking away from it, but With NLP, you don't have to do that. It's you know, what pictures when you think about a spider, what pictures are you making? What are you saying to yourself? It's working with the strategy, what's causing that behavior, what's causing you to act like that, not, you know, what event happened, if that makes sense.
As any emergency responder knows, whether it's in the military, in their situation, EMTs, fire people, police, see some horrendous stuff happen. And I think the biggest, most fantastic use is being able to take those horrendous, huge memories and handle them so that they're no longer in your view screen, they're out of the way, and you have them supplanted, replaced with something else. And those skills are just incredible, and it takes time to work on those. And I never really got that until I went and studied with Dr. Bandler, and it's phenomenal. That's huge for any emergency responder, is not have to deal with having that negativity pop back as memories.
I spend a lot of time teaching women how to have their babies and not feel any pain. Now, when I tell people that, they think, you must be nuts, because childbirth is painful. They've all seen that stuff in movies and on TV where the woman is screaming in agony. It doesn't have to be like that. So by using a strategy that Richard used to find out how people got rid of their fears, I did exactly the same thing to find out how women who had easy births had easy births. And there are a lot of them around. There are many more women that have an easy birth experience than the other kind. It's just the other kind are more vocal. So I use NLP and hypnosis to teach women how to have pain-free childbirth.
Now I'm working with Olympic athletes, or people that goes to Olympic Games or the world champions in many different sports, because actually the point is not the sport. Athletes are performing with this brain in a completely different way when they are in a great day or when they are in a slump. So what it takes basically is just to understand how they create their best performance and give to them the strategy to do that.
Today we're here because I think I have an interesting story to tell. And tomorrow is a special day for me because tomorrow I'm gonna race. I'm gonna do a very strong, a very hard competition, a triathlon competition. I'm going to kick everybody's ass today. It's a 2 kilometers swim in open water, and then 93 kilometers biking with a lot of hills. And then the final part is 21 kilometers of run. It's very important for me because 4 years ago, a doctor, said to me, I can't be things like this because I had the cancer, and I did chemotherapy and radiotherapy and surgery and all the types of cures. And then after all these cures, some doctors told me that I'm too old to fully recover from this illness. And I didn't trust them.
One of the amazing things about NLP is you can apply it to completely different environment. My business partner, Roberta, she had a problem with her health, and she was basically applying all the techniques she learned on herself in order to get healthier and healthier every single day. And as soon as she started doing that, then she thought, well, I can do this with my body in order to recover, but when I just recovered, actually I can push it a little bit harder. So while the medical doctor said, well, you're not gonna be the same after this cancer, actually what happened was that she became better.
And the particular thing is that doctors said to me, the reason why the cures have this amazing success is for your attitude. Because I demonstrate an attitude in front of all this challenge that was really particular, and it is the attitude I developed thanks to NLP. Richard is the person who changed my way of thinking, because Richard taught me how to use my brain in a useful way.
And when it comes to being more motivated, to being smarter, to making better decisions, changing your beliefs when they're not working for you, all of those things are learnable, changeable ways of controlling your own consciousness. And a lot of people think NLP is about manipulating other people, and that's not my shtick. That don't come from me. I'm teaching you to control your own mind so that it does what you want to, so that you can think on purpose.
All I ever did with people was get them to solve the problem, to get beyond where they were, so that they could change the way they felt, so they could do new things. And the easiest route to that is to change the way you think. It is the most controllable thing. You can, through meditation, learn to control your heart rate. But boy, if you change the way you think, you can control just about everything in your life and most of what happens to you. It doesn't mean bad things will never happen, but it means you'll get over them a lot faster and move on. Because all you get in your entire life are moments. And some of them are good, some of them are not good.
Basically, it was a hideous nightmare. It destroyed me financially, it destroyed my reputation. And it's not that I couldn't build it up, again, by doing good work, but you know, all I ever really tried to do was help people. And this just took me apart in every way imaginable.
When I met Richard, that was perhaps when he was at his most vulnerable.
They came and arrested me. And when I asked for my lawyer, they told me I couldn't have my lawyer, that he was a material witness. It was just, from that time forward, I was just in jail. I didn't know what the fuck to do. My lawyer couldn't talk to me. You know, they don't really let you do anything. They stuck me in max security with a bunch of very hardened criminals. And having not spent much time in jail, I really didn't know what I was supposed to do. And fortunately, I got Jerry Schwartzbach as a lawyer.
Well, I drove to Santa Cruz, and I was processed into the Santa Cruz County Jail. And Richard was in a room, small attorney visiting room, wearing an inmate's orange jumpsuit, looking very tired and very afraid and nervous.
He came and talked to me, and when I hired him, it still took 4 months for me to get out of jail.
My first goal was to try to get him released on bail. He had, I believe, a $500,000 bail on him when I met him, and so I filed a motion to have the amount of the bail reduced.
They just kind of made a story that worked. And they got a lot of mileage out of the fact that, you know, they called me a pop guru and a pop psychologist and all kinds of weird things.
When I first meet any client, I don't accept what anyone says at face value. I investigate everything I possibly can. It was only by doing extensive and meticulous preparation and investigation, both factual and scientific, that we were able to demonstrate that not only was James Marino mentally unbalanced, in my view, a pathological liar, in my view, but that his version of events were not consistent with the scientific evidence. And Richard's version of events was.
From the time that Corinne got shot, when James went nuts, I thought, but I really, on reflection, think he planned it. Because, I mean, I was at home, I got a call that he'd been beaten up at some bar, asked for a ride home, and when I picked him up, he was all beat up. And he didn't seem to know who did it or why they did it or whatever, and I just took him home, put him on the couch, had him go to sleep. And he woke me up later and said he wanted to go to his girlfriend's house, and then went nuts, started tearing the place up, and came and shot her.
And there were only 3 people in the room, and one of them was dead, so the murder had to have been committed by one of the 2. And I think Marino panicked. He had used Richard's gun, in my view, to kill Corinne. He sought legal advice, and what was discussed between he and his lawyer, I don't know, but it resulted in him going to the police and basically saying that Richard had committed the murder.
They intimidated witnesses. They told my girlfriend if she didn't tell them that I had admitted doing it, that they were going to take her kids away from her.
I remember hard copy being in front of our house and having to go to middle school with that outside. I remember some of my friends' parents not letting them play with me anymore. And getting letters from Richard when he was in jail. You know, that there was this I don't know if it was cellmate or someone else who would do this crazy artwork. Mm-hmm. And that was it. In terms of content and the particulars, I felt really shielded, you know. I mean, I did testify for a small portion. I was 11, 12, maybe.
It was a really confusing time, I think, for our whole family. There was a huge unknown. He could go to prison for 30 years or something. You know, it was, I think my biological father testified against him. At one point, you know, it tore our whole lives as we knew them apart.
And they kept saying that, you know, that I did all kinds of things that never happened. And so we had to rebut everything because it was trial by character assassination. I mean, the fact that I was there and they decided that I was the person to do it because there was blowback on me, and that's because I was sitting right next to her.
The prosecutor was faced with this very high profile, locally very high profile case, which on its face appeared to be a very strong case for the prosecution. And then he relied upon the pathologist to provide expert testimony, not only with regard to pathology and the path of the bullet inside Corinne's head, but he also he fashioned himself as an expert in blood spatter. And then gunpowder, this pathologist thought he was an expert in gunpowder analysis. And he gave testimony that I proved was, with proper experts in the fields, proved was simply wrong. They relied upon this pathologist who simply gave faulty testimony.
At the end of it, they acquitted me like that. It was so fast, it actually shocked my lawyer. He just, you know, we went back to the hotel room after closing arguments, and we were going to go have lunch, and he walked in and he goes, "The jury is back." I'm not sure how long they were out, but it wasn't very long. And we walked back over to the courthouse, and that was it. And I left town and didn't go back because, you know, we made a lot of cops look very bad because we caught them in lies, we caught them in all kinds of stuff. And I just didn't feel safe there anymore. It certainly taught me who I could trust and who my friends were, and who wasn't.
The first thing people would say to me was, "How can you work with this guy?" And I said, "Because you don't know him like I know him." And then I encapsulated that to my response now is, let me tell you what's obvious, okay? Knowing my good friend Richard, okay? Richard was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong guy, okay? And everything else that happened after that, all right? I might have some information you'll never have. I'm not really sure. And I believe Richard.
Some people make a big deal out of the murder trial with Richard. I used to try and defend anybody, just like any other American, you know, innocent until proven guilty. There were all manner of twisted views. What was the real reason behind this position, that position? Who really did kill? Who didn't kill? Why was Richard being pilloried?
I asked him, I said, did you murder the prostitute? And he looked me in the eye and he said, no, I didn't. And I know him pretty well, and I believe him.
I heard about it, I read about it on Wikipedia, and I don't judge, I judge him for the things he does every single day, not one blip in his life as many years ago.
Did it have a degrading impact on the acceptance of NLP? Yeah, absolutely. No question about it.
A woman called me, this was probably back in the 90s. She goes, well, I owe Richard money. And I said, you do? She said, yes. I said, okay. And I called Richard. I said, Richard, this woman called, and she owes you money. And Richard's first response was, I don't think so. If anybody owes me money, I know who they are. I said, well, here's her name. And he said, I don't remember the name, sorry. I said, well, she saved the money up. You loaned her $15,000 to bury her brother. She was in a seminar with you. He said, oh, I remember that now. He said, I didn't loan her the money. He said, I gave her the money. I didn't expect any payment back. And I said, well, she saved up enough money with interest, and she wants to know where you want her to send it. And here's her phone number if you want to call her. He said, no, I don't want to call her. Tell her to take the money and go have a great vacation, go spend it on herself. And I said, okay. And that's what I did. And I got stories on top of stories on top of stories like this. People would take advantage of Richard if they knew how generous he has been with other people.
I've seen Richard do some really amazing things. I think the most unusual, they're all remarkable, I think the most unusual, the most unique for me was during my apprenticeship. This would have been 15 odd years ago. We were in Switzerland and Richard was doing a workshop. And there was a guy who came on stage and he basically, when he leaned forward, he felt like he was leaning back. And when he leant back, he felt like he was leaning forward, and he found it very dangerous to drive, but he wanted to learn to drive again. So he didn't ask Richard to change it, he asked Richard to make it so that he could drive that way, which of course is kind of the hard way of doing things. And Richard somehow used hypnosis with the guy and set in like a, what do you use with spirit level? He kind of built in a mental spirit level so that the guy could correct his balance and correct the way that he saw the world. I think he kind of saw things upside down, or it was a really weird thing that the guy, I've never seen nor heard of anything like it since. And Richard basically did what he did, which I don't profess to know. Great hypnosis, and next thing you know, the guy was able to walk around, keep his balance, feel good, and he was driving, I think he hired a car and was driving around, you know, the mountains of Switzerland and everything before the seminar had finished.
On the penultimate day of the seminar, I was sitting there just minding my own business, and Richard pulled me up onto the stage as a demo subject. And I'm not entirely sure to this day what happened, but I just remember him, you know, touching my forehead at the end and saying, everything will be okay. And it really was. It was funny because I walked out of the seminar and I started crying, but really quite heavily crying. And everyone was gathered around and going, oh God, you know, Richard's done something terrible, she's crying. And I was going, oh, I'm so happy, I'm so happy. It was like something inside of me had unlocked, and it was just this complete unleash of emotions, of the past, of rubbish. It's very difficult to put into words, but it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life.
Also being able to help victims the same way. Now they're stuck with something that's bad and bad memories, and if we can cool that off for them a little bit, It helps us help them, helps them help us get the crime solved, get them situated and whatnot. So that right there is just huge, 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 huge.
I'm an engineer by trade, so I'm probably one of the most cynical people you can get. It's a personal story. Like I said, I'm a very cynical person, and I need evidence to support everything that I believe in, do, etc. And I was told that I was top of my career, very educated, very successful, happily married to the most amazing man. And then life can change in an instant. I was in a terrible car crash 7 years ago, and I lost my husband. And everything fell apart. I tried to use all the tools and techniques available to me that had driven me in the past, helped me succeed, helped me get better and healthier. Couldn't do anything. You know, basic functioning, brushing my teeth, washing, was a day-to-day struggle. 2 years on, and I was still in the same place, unable to move on. And so I thought, well, how would I approach this if this is a work solution or a work problem? So I went to seek out what would be the best treatment out there, the treatment that would have 100% results for me, for what I wanted. And I just wanted to get on with life. And a friend of mine told me about Richard Bandler.
She came to a seminar, which is a small seminar, and everybody writes what they want. And she wrote this thing that was almost like, it made it sound like she was going to kill herself. And you know, it was when I read the things, I'm not really reading what they're asking for. I'm looking for what's really going on that keeps them from having the things they want in their life.
Things were so bad that I was on suicide watch, because the two focus things in my life were my husband and my relationship with him and my career. And after the car crash, I'd lost both. I was unable to function as a human, emotionally, physically, in every way possible.
It was obvious to me there was nothing about the future. Everything was just about the past and blown out of proportion. And not inappropriately so. Her husband had died. She had lost her job that she'd had for years, that she loved, of being an engineer, and she couldn't see through the cloud that anything good could happen to her.
I'm sitting down in front of the other students, and Dr. Bandler starts talking to me. And I remember waking up. I didn't realise I was sleeping. I remember waking up, and the 7 or 8 people that were in front of me were in bits, they were in tears. And I'd never felt so alive. I felt like a huge pressure had been lifted from me. I couldn't explain it. Scientifically, I couldn't explain what the hell had just happened. All I could explain was that a big weight had been lifted, and I could see clearly. And I could start building, seeing the blocks that I needed to build in order to build my life back up again.
Once I got her to start thinking like an engineer, because it's what she was good at, I said, but look, in your mind, you have this all sorted out. If you were an engineer, how would you go and redesign this so it would go towards finding the right man, right? Because she looked at me and she goes, well, I haven't thought about it that way. And I said, well, you told me you were a good engineer. And she looked at me and she goes, I am a good engineer. And I said, okay, so how would you take, because you got these pictures here and they're stopping you from doing this, and go, and what you'd really like to do is have a good relationship. Right, I said, so what would you have, what would you have to have in your mind to get from this to that? If you had a rocket and you want to get it to the moon, you have to have a machine that does it.
I went on after the course. I didn't try to kill myself again. I tried to focus on getting my life back and rebuilding it back. I'd achieved quite a lot in my career. I've been very successful, and I'm a humble person. I'm very grateful for everything. But the one thing that I always wanted was a baby. And in fact, on my school book, I had 2 things that I'd written to my teacher in terms of what I want to do when I grow up. One was to be a rocket scientist, and the other one was to be a mummy. It was simple as that. So that was the one thing I really wanted to do. Following the car crash, doctors had said that there was no way that I could ever hold a pregnancy and get pregnant. I went to see specialists in America, in India and in the UK, and they said even with IVF that I had less than 3.5% chance of it working. And that 3.5%, no, I'm not going to settle for that. So I could see a bit of the old me coming back again, you know, I wasn't going to settle for no. If I want to do something, I'll do it. So I started using the tools and techniques that Dr. Bandler's written in his books. And I went through my first course of IVF treatment with a donor. It failed the first time round using a donor, and at that stage, 4 years on, I'd got close to a friend, and we decided to go for IVF treatment one more time, you know, before looking at other channels. And the morning of my IVF treatment, I did a pregnancy test at home and I found out I was pregnant naturally. So, and that was all through the tools and techniques brought about through NLP that I'd learned from Dr. Richard Bandler. It defies what medicine has done. It defies me what experts across the world had told me could never be done. I'm living proof, and I've got a 2-year-old beautiful son to prove it. And I'm now using the skills and tools and techniques to make his life better and easier and well, so that he can grow up to be an amazing human being and help as many people as he can.
I'm a retired intelligence officer. I spent 22 years in intelligence and special operations assignments around the world. And now I've retired after selling my company that provided intelligence training and consulting services to those same communities in the United States and a variety of international intelligence and special operations allied organizations up until 2011. The nature of the clandestine intelligence service and much of the rest of the community depends on being able to collect information from people where you need to develop, maintain, and increase levels of rapport, ultimately to being able to influence people. There are very few aspects of our lives where we are not influencing other people. But to do it in a directed, cohesive, organized, and coherent way is kind of a skill set that not everyone has. And it really tends to differentiate also-ran performers from high-end performers, particularly in the human intelligence and special operations communities. So as a result, when we began searching after emerging human technologies, we learned about Richard and John. Our relationship with Richard and John began in about 1982, latter part of 1982, when I received that assignment to start trying to identify emerging human technologies that might benefit the intelligence community.
Well, first of all, NLP, of course, is developed as a therapeutic modality. Basically, how do you fix broken people? Our problem was totally different. We had very, very good people, and it was how do we make them better? And we had the model of excellence, and say the JEDI project was one aspect of that. But we wanted to know, just how good can we be? High-performing units. I had Richard, I had John Grinder, Tony Robbins, all under contract at different times. Again, our interests were multiple. One was improving the capabilities for the soldiers that we had. Another one from the intelligence perspective is that we dealt with what you call spies. This was the bad old days, remember the Soviet era and all of that. And we would have people that you would send, who were called legal travelers, could go behind the Iron Curtain and come back out, and you needed to find out very quickly if they'd been turned. We used NLP techniques to reestablish contact and confidence between the individual and the handler that was out there.
The other piece of it is getting into someone's belief systems, getting into your belief systems, getting into my belief systems, so that I can change my belief systems in order to be more efficient in my interactions with you and my understanding of my own and other people's belief systems. I can more rapidly focus on yours and identify those aspects of your personal belief systems that would afford us the opportunity to encourage you to cooperate with us, whether it's a terrorist cell participant in an interrogation, or somebody betraying his country as a Russian scientist, or as a Czech bomb maker, or whomever. Everybody has pieces of themselves that can be broken apart.
Let me give you an example that's one of these mind-blowing ones that we actually saw Richard do. One of the people who was functioning with me was a CIA agent who had been captured in Lebanon. He is the only one who was captured that we actually got back alive. But he was about to be executed, and the cavalry came in at the last minute and recovered him. One of the things we had Richard do was he would recreate history. And you would change how people saw an event in their life. And you can imagine that being, kidnapped by terrorists is a strong emotional event that would be very hard to cover up. But we actually changed his life in such a way, or the story about his life, in such a way that he could recount it as if the incident had never happened.
I think that Richard probably learned a lot of his style from having observed Grinder, having modeled Grinder's behavior, said, I'll take out this piece, this piece, this piece, and this piece, and I'll kludge it on to who I am, and I'm going to be Richard. And as I saw Richard over a few years, that seemed to be, it seemed that breakup was going to be inevitable, because the clash of the titans, clash of titanic egos, that was kind of to be expected. It might have been better for them to have remained together and had a therapist assigned to them 24/7, or 2, or 3, or 4.
Richard was the brains behind, understanding and the development of NLP. He is eccentric, say the least, and could be problematic, difficult to work with at times, but always deliver the goods. I mean, it was just amazing kinds of things that we saw done and learned how to do.
Part of what happened between the two of them was that, first of all, they were very independent. Let's say it takes a healthy ego to do what they did. Some would call it arrogance, but they were both very strong personalities, and yet they were kind of, for a while, it would be like, why did the Beatles break up? Why does any group break up? It's because to have your own identity, it was always Bandler, Grinder, Grinder, Bandler, B and G, G and B. And I think they really wanted their own space. It's like, why would somebody go do a solo album? Why did Paul McCartney or John Lennon go do that? Then I think there was other dynamics. They were different. They had, also sort of different paths. But I think largely they wanted their independence.
We weren't really close. We hung out together and did the same thing, but we didn't spend other time together, really. We tried to, but we're just different. Him and I started NLP, and there are a lot of other people that say they did, and some of them were around, but they didn't do anything. They were good guinea pigs. And some of them have become NLP trainers and, gone places in the world where they have institutes. What John and I did was very productive. It was from 75 to about 85, and then off and on. Somewhere in the 80s, we both started, although we worked together, mostly we worked apart. And we didn't develop much at that point in time. We had most of the stuff was, the last books that I did, the Real People Press books, were transcripts of us doing workshops, and they didn't even signify whether it was him or me talking.
I honestly don't know what happened between Richard and John, like a couple of cowboys or a couple of outlaws. They rode the trail together for some time, and it was generative, and it was great. And then they decided to kind of go their separate ways.
From the moment I first saw Paula, I was in love with her. And her friends told her to watch out for me, that I was a bad person. And, you know, so it took us a long time before we ended up together.
I mean, they were super in love.
Yeah, very passionate. Yeah, they definitely cared about each other very much. You know, he was obviously devastated when our mother passed away. You know, that shook up all of our worlds, you know, greatly.
Yeah.
Paula was not doing very well, actually. You know, she had transverse myelitis, and I'm not sure all what else. Richard worked with her a lot. Was able to get her to you know, walking and things like that. But her death was totally, you know, no one called it.
I was completely blindsided.
When Paula died, it was a shock to all of us. Paula was like a sister to me. I mean, we were really, really close. And it was in the middle of a seminar. We were doing a seminar, I think it was a design human engineering seminar. And she didn't wake up one morning. And then when we realized, you know, she was gone, they took her, and Richard and I came into the suite next door, and we sat. And we must have sat for almost 24 hours. We just sat. We just literally just sat, and we're just being for almost 24 hours, till he finally got exhausted and fell asleep.
He was crushed. I mean, we kept people with him because he was devastated. I've never seen him in that position, actually. I went up to see him that evening, and I said to him, because we had a class going downstairs, a seminar, and I said to him, I said, Richard, how you doing? And he said to me, how's the class doing? And I said, the class is doing okay. They're all fine. I explained everything to them, you know. So, but the class is doing well. But that was his initial concern when I asked him that question. I said, how you doing? And the next day was the same thing. I asked him, how are you doing today? And he said, how's everybody doing downstairs? And it was very sincere on his part. It was very interesting time, I guess. The third day, then after this, I said to him, how you doing, Richard? And he said, I'm doing okay. He said, can I come downstairs and teach today? I said, by all means.
When he was down at the seminar, you wouldn't know what had happened. He'd stroll in, he'd smile, stop for a picture with someone. You know, most people were like, he's here, is he okay? You know, and we'd also told the people, please don't go up and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You know, just act like it's a normal seminar. Everybody act like a normal seminar. And Richard did the same thing. And it was so intense. And he's smiling and helping people, you know, with their issues and their problems. And then he would come upstairs and he would just collapse.
I was here for my trainer training, and there was the seminar before, and she just passed away. And so when I got in and they told me this information, I thought, well, maybe we won't see him the first couple of days at least. But actually, he was there on stage right from the beginning, and I remember him saying something like, you know, guys, as you probably know, my wife just passed away last week. And he was kind of having, you know, his eyes watering. But then he said something like, and you know, my wife really loved what is my work. And he started going into a completely different state. I was completely amazed by that because I thought, wow, how can he do that? And I realized in that particular moment the power of the tools he's teaching to everybody.
And everything he said had so much more power behind it because we all knew it was coming directly from his heart, everything he said. And it was an amazing seminar. It was an absolute amazing seminar. And then after the seminar, we went and had a private service at a place nearby, and we had a celebration of Paula's life. And it was, as now looking back, it was beautiful. Of course, then it was extremely sad, but I was in awe. I was in awe of how he handled that and how his heart was that he could, you know, he didn't want to just close off. He wanted to make sure these people had a great seminar.
And on the last day, I remember him looking out into to the delegates, and he said, always remember to tell someone that you love them, and always live for the day. And then he said, because I would give anything to be able to tell Paula that I love her again. And there was like a little glimpse into, wow, you know, this is a man who is real. He is human. He has feelings, just like all of us.
I really don't know how he did that. I mean, that was an amazing demonstration of his ability to control his emotions and his state. But he had all those people that had paid to be on the course, and he stood up on stage and he delivered what he promised to deliver.
And everybody thinks the same thing about Richard. They say, well, you know, he should be able to bounce back so fast. Well, I don't think they know Richard real well.
NLP is not an elixir that you just drink it and that's it. Oh, never mind, you know, somebody died, it doesn't matter, I don't care, my dog's died, you know, I've lost my job, who cares? It's not about that. It's about handling emotions the best way that you can, but you still have those emotions. You still experience grief. You still experience loss. You still experience heartache. You don't become a robot where you don't feel. It's just learning how to feel it in a way that doesn't destroy you so that you can still carry on with your life. So Richard still feels.
You know, Richard's great, has always been great at helping other people. He's been great at even working on certain things with himself. This was a serious, devastating blow for him.
We were so joined at the hip that when she was gone, it was like, you know, it was impossible for me to figure out what to do next. You know, I mean, I still knew how to teach. I knew what to do, but you know, my reason for doing it and what to look forward to was missing. And you know, Rachel would come over and get me because, you know, I was also fairly ill at the time. I had had a stroke and didn't know it.
He wasn't being looked after by good people at the time. You know, in that moment of grief, he was being taken advantage of by certain people, which made it worse. Whereas the people that really cared about him were trying to boost him and rally him together and could see that something wasn't right.
You know, fortunately, I'm smart enough to know that I have a lot of good memories with Paula. So that's, if I'm going to think about something, that's what I think about. And I'm lucky. I believe in the afterlife. I don't believe in necessarily the Christian one, but I do believe there's an after, that strong consciousnesses survive. And, you know, I don't believe that energy does anything but transmute. And the question of how your energy transmutes is one we all are going to get the answer to.
I think he just sort of had this moment where he thought, right, that's it. He's a polarity responder, so he decided, I'm not taking any of that. And he learned to walk again and defied everybody, and all the, you know, all his friends that were around him rallied round, and we were like, we need you, we need you. And you could see some life force coming back into him.
I did it by the smallest increment. I did toe lifts until I could get my toes to work. and my feet were completely numb, so I had to do it visually. I couldn't even feel my feet. It literally took me about 3 or 4 years before I could start to walk with canes.
I was amazingly impressed with Richard too, because shortly after that, he'd agreed to do a presentation for me when I launched medical NLP at Guy's Hospital, which is Guy's Medical School, which is a major medical school here that I was teaching at the time. And I hit on the idea of having him do a kind of presentation to give some sort of background to the thing. And I was very wary about it because, you know, I knew that he was going through really hard times, really bad time. But he was astonishing the way he dealt. He turned up in the most beautiful, I think it was black Prada suit, looking absolutely spectacular, and just had people riveted from the very beginning. And he just was such a consummate professional.
And then I remember one day I went to meet him for breakfast where he was staying. And I could see something had changed. There was like a little twinkle in his eye. And he looked at me and I said, well, how are you doing, Richard? He goes, I'm doing good. And he told me that he had met someone, a certain lady, who now we know to be Glenda.
I was looking for a book, and it was a book about, it was entitled Romancing the Soul. And being a chiropractor, it was all about having sex with back pain. And so I had gone on Amazon trying to find this book, and it was out of print. So I put my name on a wish list looking for this book. And one of Richard's apprentices, Mark Haley, had seen my name. And Richard had talked to him about me from years ago. And Mark called Richard and said, was her name Bradstock? And he went, yeah. And where do you suppose she is? And Richard said, well, she was in Texas. Got my address, and the next thing I know, I get the book and a card from Richard. He was living in Ireland, and it just said, you were the girl I let get away. And so he said, call me. And I thought, well, I think I'll let him call me. So I sent a picture. He had sent me a picture, and I sent him a picture and wrote a card. And so for 6 months, we just talked on the phone a whole lot. And I could tell that he, you know, it was just fun. I mean, it was like no time had passed at all, but there were so many adventures in both of our lives. So then he told me about the kids in California, and I said, well, when you pop over, why don't you drop into Texas and come to see me? So that's what he did. And so it was 2005, and it was interesting. We had all kinds of plans. I picked him up at the airport. I took him to go get barbecue, and we brought it home, and I was serving up the plates, and he goes, I think I'll get my suitcase out of the car. And just as I turned around to remind him about that strip of ice, we had had the one ice storm of the whole winter, he stepped on the ice and his feet flew up, and so I sat in bed with him for the next 3 days, waiting on him because he had cracked a rib really bad and could barely breathe or laugh. So we caught up on all those years, and we just decided to, you know, I would travel along and take care of him. So that's how this all started up again.
Well, the first time I met Glenda was here at one of the seminars. Richard actually brought her to the seminar, and this was before they were married. And we had heard that Richard had been dating someone, and someone that he had met way before, even Paula. And my first impression when she walked into the hotel was how bubbly she was. She was bubbly and vivacious. And I thought to myself immediately, this is what Richard needs. You know, he was been so sad and just, you know, existing and doing great seminars and doing great work. But to have this bubbly, vivacious energy back in his life again was something I was so grateful for. When I started talking to her, I found out she was a doctor and she was interested in nutrition. And then it was really funny because anytime Richard came to the seminars and she wasn't with him for some reason, he had this giant tackle box. And I'd be like, you going fishing, Richard? What are you doing? And he's like, oh no, this is my vitamins that Glenda sent with me. And then I'd get a text from Glenda, make sure Richard takes his vitamins every day. Ask him, make sure he's taking his vitamins. And I thought, wow, this is great, because Richard kept getting younger and younger looking and healthier.
Glenda's like a breath of fresh air. She's amazing. I mean, after Paula, I guess we all wondered what was going to happen, how Richard was going to fare. But then suddenly he arrived with this amazing person. And she just fit right in with everything that we do. And of course, she's an amazing doctor in her own right. So she looks after him. She does great things for us as well. She's a very caring, amazing individual.
There's one person who has made it so that I'm healthier than I was 10 years ago, and I'm certainly a lot more cheerful, although that may be hard to believe. I wanted to thank my wife, who's been here this week. Thank you very much, Glenda.
He's very, very loving. He brings me flowers all the time. Loves to buy me jewelry. You know, that's his favorite thing, I think. He doesn't like to get up early. And he's slow to wake up. He could stay up all night. He's really a night creature. He likes to read. Now that he's feeling up and fine again, he goes to the gym. He loves to swim. He walks the dogs from time to time. He loves our dogs. He's always loved animals, but he used to be a zoo keeper at the zoo for elephants. But let's see. He's quiet. He's really quiet when he's at home. A lot of people wouldn't guess that, but he doesn't talk a whole lot. You kind of have to draw him out. He sits and thinks a lot.
Kate and I have just finished a book about education. I think this is going to be one of the best actual NLP books that's come out, you know, since probably NLP Volume 1.
He kept saying this one phrase, I can teach NLP faster because I use NLP to teach NLP. This was a phrase, and it kept ringing round in my head. And eventually, one day, I asked him the question, and I said to him, how come you say you can teach NLP faster because you use NLP to teach NLP, and we're not using NLP to teach everything else? And he said to me, that, my dear, is a very good question. And I basically got my job that way. And that began our collaboration. I spent the next 5 or 6 years figuring it out, working with kids, teaching teachers, doing research projects to work out how we use NLP to teach lots of other things. And of course, Richard, I've been absolutely privileged because Richard has been my mentor in that, and he's given me lots of examples of the strategies that people use.
This has spelling strategies, reading strategies, art strategies, music strategies. It's got a little bit of everything in there on how you would get a kid to be able to do something that right now if you can't do, they say you're educationally handicapped or hyperactive or some such mental disease. It's always a learning disability, never a teaching disability. And I think this will be good for teachers, but I also think it will be good for neurolinguistic programmers, because a lot of them, you know, they know a lot of techniques, but they don't know the technology itself. And it is very technical in the sense that, you know, it takes a certain set of skills to find out how somebody unconsciously processes information, so you can teach somebody else to do it.
It's what's often termed reasonable adjustment. So if somebody can't do something or doesn't like something, we have to somehow adjust our behaviour around that person in order to modify our behaviour so that they can be safe or feel comfortable, whatever. Well, there are some things that we can feel comfortable with that it's not good to feel comfortable about. We can be complacent about not being able to read. We can be comfortable with our own ignorance about something. So in NLP, we would say, well, how do we make that person comfortable learning, by changing them on the inside, changing their representation of this particular problem. So can we alter that so that the person can engage? And I'll give you an example of that if you like. One of the things that happens in reasonable adjustment throughout the world is that, you know, somebody with, say, dyslexia can't read. So the reasonable adjustment provides somebody to sit next to them and read for them. Now that's an incapacity model. It's stupid. You know, teach them to read. Cuba taught 98% of its population to read. It has a 98% literacy rate. Now they have just the same number of people with dyslexia and learning difficulties as anybody else. So if you can teach, a country can teach 98% of the population to read, then surely we can find the way for that one child to access learning. So yeah, it's not comfortable in that, but how can we make the world work for that person by changing them so they interact with the world comfortably rather than taking them out of the world?
Schools already know what words they want you to spell, but just giving you a list of them isn't enough. They have to build that machine inside your head that will memorize words. And so we're going to give teachers the tool. They did a research project in England where we sent in people and they taught teachers, and everybody's scores went up 30%.
The world now needs help. You know, there's all this junk around, all this falsehood, all this negative manipulation. And I think that the brain and global mental literacy, NLP, these other schools of really good thinking will save the world. And the future of the world is in the hands of the teachers.
The NLP skill set is something that every child should learn. They should learn it at home, they should learn it at school, we should be talking about these things. You know, how do you communicate well with people? How, you know, just establishing baselines. Am I talking to a person who's highly visual, highly auditory, highly kinesthetic? What are the kind of metaphors I should use? How do I you know, pace and perhaps even lead them in terms of body language and tonality and tempo and that's like NLP 101. I mean, that's like first hour, first day stuff. And there's this whole set of skills and tools that are really powerful, whether you're trying to get a job, whether you're trying to do a job, whether you're trying to communicate effectively with your teachers, with your peers, with your potential partners or mates. You know, all these things. I mean, literally there is not a dimension of life where having an NLP toolkit available to you in your brain at all times is not an asset.
The development of NLP is a gift to the world, and people don't realise how far it's spread now over the years into so many things. People don't realise that they're being taught things that come from NLP, they're reading things that come from NLP.
He's really a genius of our time, because thanks to him we now have a simple instruction manual of our brain, and I think it's quite a miracle. And before Richard, all the studies about how our brain were only psychiatrists can study our brain, or neuropsychiatrists, etc. But now everybody can learn how to better use his brain due to NLP. And it's really, really simple and for everybody.
I wrote a book called Magic in Practice, which was specifically for health professionals. And I realized that we're going to have to verify and ground everything in so-called evidence. And what I started to do is I started to look at the principles of NLP, rather than the names of the different techniques and approaches, what the underlying principles were of that. And then I discovered that there was actually quite a lot out there that could support and verify it. So I think that from our point of view, from the medical point of view, the reason that it has got what acceptance it has got is because people feel more comfortable with that.
So when I learned NLP, I just thought, wow, someone's now given me a handbook for my brain. And you know what? It's easy to control the things that you thought you just couldn't. It's so easy.
it's a system, and it's an umbrella for everything I do. There isn't a thought or an action that I take now that hasn't been influenced for the infinitely better by what I learned. Forever grateful. There's a lot of people teaching NLP in the world today that aren't Richard Bandler. And if somebody asked me, I'd say, you need to see Richard, because that's the best version available. There's a lot of people doing great stuff, but Richard is the business. He knows it best.
If you have a chance to go see him, you gotta see the guy. It's an experience as much as a learning experience. It's an experience. It's an experience in hypnosis. It's an experience in humor. It's an experience of how to speak and hold the crowd's attention. And it's also, there's not that many enigmatic men out there or women out there that you can really say who's like a living legend. So you just want to see him, if nothing more than just that, to get a dose of it. Because, when I talk about Richard, I'm always like saying, you don't understand. So you sort of can't describe it,
When you look at the history of the world, there's not a lot of people who actually made a consequential change in society, culture, and arguably world history. Richard Bandler is one of those people. NLP has changed the world. It might not be in giant neon letters, but it's there, it's real, and it's powerful stuff.
John Grender, co-founder of NLP, offers these closing thoughts on the life and works of Richard Bandler. I recognize with pleasure the essential historical contribution of Richard Bandler as the co-creator, alongside myself, of the technology of NLP, and I specifically offer him even now my congratulations and best wishes in his continuing work. Those readers in search of a model of excellent collaboration will do well to step past the present state of affairs between us and focus on the work accomplished by the two of us.